Welcome. My name is Professor Helen Payne, and I'm the founding editor-in-chief for the journal Body, Movement and Dance in Psychotherapy. This is an international peer-reviewed journal published by Taylor and Francis. Articles explore embodied relating in psychotherapy. It is the only scholarly journal wholly dedicated to the growing fields of body psychotherapy, somatic psychology, and dance movement psychotherapy. The importance of the role of the body and movement in manifesting expression, insight and change and in promoting recovery is increasingly being recognised in fields such as mental health, neuro and cognitive sciences and psychology. The journal encourages broad and in-depth discussion of issues relating to research activities, theory, clinical practice, professional development and personal reflections. This journal is essential reading for all body psychotherapists, somatic psychologists, dance movement psychotherapists and creative arts therapists. It also provides important material for all mental and physical health professionals, such as psychiatrists, psychologists, psychotherapists, counsellors, and other relevant health professionals. We are delighted to launch and fund the present series of interviews, showcasing international pioneers from the fields of body psychotherapy and dance movement psychotherapy. We are grateful for their time and their participation, and value their contribution to disseminating history, theory, research, and practice. Additional appreciations go to the interviewers, who also volunteered their time freely, and to the recording editors of the series, Jim O'Connell and Seb Syracuse. We hope you enjoy listening.
So, good afternoon, no, good morning, Sharon, to you. It's a good morning for you.
Right,
Okay.
good morning.
Yes, so we are beginning our conversation that is promoted by the journal Body, Movement and Dance in Psychotherapy. So first of all, I want to introduce you to our audience. And I will say that you're first of all, we have a conversation about some aspects of the history and development of dance movement therapy as it was in the US. Sharon is very well known in the US and in many other countries through her writings, her roles in the American Dance Therapy Association since its beginnings, her clinical work, mainly in psychiatry, and her teaching in her country, as well as in Asia, Middle East, South America, and Spain. I am also dance movement therapy. My name is Dr. Hilda Wengrower. I studied with Sharon many years ago in Israel, and for many years after graduation, we were in contact, and she was also my mentor and inspiration for many years. In the almost the last 3 decades, our relationship turned into a partnership and a friendship, also as the co-editors of 2 books. The Art and Science of Dance Movement Therapy, Life is Dance, which was translated into 5 or 6 languages, and our more recent book of 2021, Dance and Creativity Within Dance Movement Therapy. The journal encourages broad and in-depth discussion of research, theory, clinical practice, professional development, and personal reflections. Okay, so Sharon, now we are going to talk between ourselves after this presentation. So, as I said to you before, for me, in terms of the development of dance movement therapy, you are a participant of this development from its very beginnings. You are also a protagonist, and you are a witness. You are a protagonist because you didn't stay enclosed in your practice, but you really took important roles in the organizational aspect through the establishing the American Dance Therapy Association, and also writing articles. So you're a protagonist also, and you're a witness you're a protagonist still now. You are very present, and also through the Chace Foundation, that maybe you will tell us a little bit later also. And you're a witness also. So, my first question is, how were your beginnings? We know that you were very close to Marian Chace, so maybe you want to tell us a little bit about this. We are with you.
Okay. I first found out about Marian Chace when I was in touch with a colleague who was also later active, Beth Kalish, who was working with autistic children at the time. And I asked her, how do you do that? And she sent me to Marian Chace at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington. I was living in Baltimore at the time. So it was an hour's journey. So I went to visit Marian Chace and said, I think this is something I want to do. And I did not know what it was at all, but I had a feeling that this is what I had to do. And so she interviewed me and said, okay, we'll start coming down, as I was like an apprentice to her. And so I went into groups with her, followed her around carrying the big heavy, at that time, a very heavy record player. Because we had records, not CDs or anything else like that. And observed and then asked questions afterwards about what she had done and why she had done it. And I gradually began to absorb and learn what this was about, though it was very exciting to watch, but very hard to truly understand the deep concepts related to it. So I kept asking questions, and eventually I was able to learn enough that I went off on my own to another hospital with her blessing.
And it's interesting because also you, together with Claire Schmeis, your colleague, you wrote a fundamental article that explains Chace's approach. And for me, it's also a very basic, not only for Chace's approach, but for dance movement therapy at all. So thank you very much for this work. I suppose that it wasn't so easy to get to identify 4 aspects in the Chace approach. How was it?
No, she never really wrote. She wrote a lot, but she did not separate out what she was really doing, and we had to do that for ourselves. So that it was an interesting process, really having to look at, okay, what does this dance therapy consist of? Because I think her work was very basic to all dance therapy. And I was fortunate that Claire and I were there at the same time so that we could discuss this and talk about it. So I'm glad the article was useful.
It's still useful. It's still useful. Thank you. Okay, so your identity is as a dance movement therapist is a blend of your involvement in organizational activities, especially as being part of the founding group of the American Dance Therapy Association. Another part of your professional identity is your work as a clinician and a trainer. And this second aspect, being a clinician and a trainer, can be approached through your publications. For example, the book Foundations of Dance Movement Therapy that you co-edited with Susan Sandel and Lon, and also in articles from the American Journal of Dance Therapy. And you know that several times I met colleagues who told me smilingly and with much admiration, love and respect that they are former students and supervisees of you. So all these former students and supervisors also are witnesses of your impact in the profession.
That's very nice.
You want to say something?
No, that's very nice to hear, certainly. Thank you.
Yeah. And you also encourage research and published articles alone or together with your late and dear husband, Harry Chaiklin. So I'd like to talk with you. I think that there is some aspect of your identity that is less known to the public, which relates to your roles in the American Dance Therapy Association along history along from 1966 till now, and what your purposes are. Because I think it's very interesting. We let's talk about this, but you know that in many countries, the professional associations or are in their beginnings, sometimes the beginnings can be a decade or even 15 years, and even if they have been established, sometimes they are held and sustained just by a small minority of volunteers. So I think that what you have to tell us about your roles in the association and why did you see it so important as part of your professional identity might be a good information to stimulate more colleagues to volunteer and to work in their national associations.
Well, let me start way back from the time I was still with Marian Chace, when I was still learning about dance therapy, because there were other people who were also involved in learning about what this was about at that time. And we got together here and there and talked and said, how do we develop this? Because we're still trying to figure out what we're doing, but there are a lot of us, not a lot, but there are quite a few of us trying to figure this out. And so we said, all right, we need a network. We need to be in communication with each other. And then by doing that, we realized that in order to be a profession, there are certain things that you have to do. And so we began talking to each other. We began communicating with each other. We began doing workshops with each other to learn from each other. We began to form the association because we knew that you need an association to do things like set standards, create training, have a place for publicizing and publishing your work and your research, and be known to the other world of professions. So we began the process of that. I remember how we signed in, because Marian Chace would have to okay this since she was such an important part of it all. So in my living room in Baltimore, we had the lawyer and several of us sit and sign these legal papers forming the American Dance Therapy Association, with Marian Chace as the first president and I was the vice president. And so as it continued, I took over. When she retired after a year, her term, I became the president. And we continued all this process of how do you become a profession. And it includes, as I said, the setting of the standards and creating a place for sharing information and learning from each other. And it's continued over the years. I was involved in so many different committees after the presidency, because when you are passionate about something, you know that there is work to be done and things to happen so that the world understands what you're doing, because, of course, nobody knew what dance therapy was. And we were all tired of people saying, dance therapy, what is that? And so we had to begin to really find ways of explaining that to people in the world, professional people and others. So if you're passionate about something, I think you get involved with all aspects of it in order to continue the Dance Therapy Association and connecting with other people.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate what you're saying. I think, again, it's important for the younger communities in the profession, and also not so young communities. In Israel, the association exists we celebrated 50 years of existence, but yet I think there is a small amount of volunteers, although it increases from year to year, but I think it's really very important to hear you. Okay, let's go to the next questions. You know that preparing for this conversation, I remember that the leading book that we had when we studied with you in Israel, with you and with the late Dr. Marakapi from Antioch, New England, was the book edited by Penny Bernstein, titled 8 Approaches in Dance Movement Therapy. So there were 8 colleagues, the 8 dance therapists. Each one wrote a chapter describing or exposing the psychotherapeutical perspective they adopted and how they use it in dance movement therapy. But I think, although to these days there are colleagues that define themselves as especially Jungian or Gestalt or psychoanalytic, etc., I think it's today there is much more an integration of different areas of knowledge. And of course, there is much more research that supports our doing and our thinking very much. Could you relate to this, please?
Yes, I agree that at that time, this really came out because of the separation in the United States of those who were Jungians and those who were not. And it took us a while to realize it has more to do with the population, who you're working with, as to what your approach is, and that we really had, at the core of everything, we all had the same concept of what was important, which was the body and dance and movement and the nonverbal communication, and that how we approached it might be slightly different, but that was not the real differences. And it was really an important part of the Dance Therapy Association when we were able to integrate the West Coast Jungians with the East Coast analytic people, with the realization that we were not that different. And I think you're right. There's an integration of ideas now that
And also, I think that there is no a therapist that when she tries to explain what she's doing, she cannot avoid referring also to neuroscience, to cognitive psychology, with its huge also contributions in the last 2-3 decades. Yes, so it's more integrated and more complex in the good sense of the word complex, that it has different ingredients.
Right.
Okay. Yes. You.
Well, I was just going to say I don't think there is any competition between the different approaches to dance therapy, because, as I said, the dance therapy part itself is what is core and important, so that everybody agrees with that part. And how you work is because of of who you're working with and what makes sense at that time.
Okay, yes, I agree with you. Okay, another thing, it's that also there are there is an expansion and a widening of different different themes or different issues that dance therapists work today with, and also different contexts in the use of dance movement therapy. Because for many years it was children, adults, and neurotic adults, psychiatry, and now you have
and hospital work hospital work.
Yes.
And now it's expanded. Yes.
Yes. Do you want to add something to this issue of this expansion?
Yes, I think that as people began to feel more confident in what they were doing and began to see how useful it was in many contexts. It started in the hospital because that's where Chace began, and it began with the Jungians, with more neurotic people or normal people, whichever you say, and children. But it began to expand to be able to work in other contexts too, that we realize that some things are very much individualized as to the problem, but also there are social problems that affect people. And so there are places in the community that dance therapists now work. I mean, they work in the prisons, they work in psychosocial centers, and wherever there is a need, dance therapists can be there, with the understanding that this psychosocial world affects people, not only individual problems, but the larger problems that affect them.
Yes, this is interesting. I think that there are some of us that really are also interested in to see how we integrate the context, the social cultural context, with the individual, how the individual that lives in this context, and how the context influences for good or for bad in the individual or the family or the micro-organizations.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Sharon, we are approaching the end. What do you see as for us, for dance movement therapy in the future, in the mid-range, or what could you like to see? Maybe you are not a prophet, so not what you see, but what would you like to see?
Right. Well, let me step back a little bit to say part of what I did was in my teaching was to do workshops in many places in the world, and that affects what I'm thinking about the future too, because being able to bring what I knew to other countries, such as Japan and South Korea and to Argentina and so forth, was a very widening experience for me too. And so that in thinking of the future, what I would like to see is one that people really in the world understand what we're talking about when we talk about dance therapy, that they're not afraid of the word dance, as people seem to be, and that in terms of dance therapists themselves, it would be wonderful to have a larger cultural kind of interchange, that where we can learn from each other. Certainly that in different countries, certain kinds of things work well because of the nature of their culture and what they have learned about their bodies and how they move and what their music is about. And so they integrate what is important to them within this work. But the question is the dance therapy base and core the same everywhere over the world? What are the things that are different, and what can we learn from each other in those settings and situations? So I think we need to be able to find a way to talk to each other and to be able to figure out what is the very basics and what is the cultural differences, and how can we look at them and use them for each other.
Yes, yes. Yes. Okay, I think there is much that we could talk but maybe we can leave it for other time. I am really grateful to you that you dedicated this time for this conversation, and that you provided for our audiences with important information. And I think that also it can be, I hope it can be inspirational as well. And say you goodbye.
Oh, there was, okay. You suggested I speak about the Marian Chace Foundation.
Yes, I forgot. Yes.
I would like to do that because
Yes.
that also has been an important part of what I've been doing over the many years.
Yes.
Because we formed that as a nonprofit organization to both support research and develop dance therapy and be supportive to others as much as we can through grants that we give. So that's another way of being able to help the profession develop, which I've been involved with.
Yes. It's really the Chace Foundation is doing a very important work in stimulating and supporting research, publishing books, translation of books, and organizing or translating the TED Talks that the colleagues in America gave, and that can be easily found in the YouTube. Yes, so this is very important also. Okay, something more that I forgot?
I don't know.
Okay, so thank you very much, and see you in another opportunity.
Thank you, Hilda.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.